So, good morning everyone. My name is Ricardo Monteiro. I'm the coordinator of the doctoral program in Understanding and Managing Extremes. We will now start with the first session. We have 2 sessions today. Well, actually 3 if you want to think of it in terms of event, but 2 batches of candidates. The first one, the one of the morning with 3 candidates that will be presenting their thesis in the fields of different natural hazards, whereas the ones in the afternoon will be more focused on earthquake engineering. I would like first to thank the 3 members of the jury that came from Florence and L'Aquila all the way to help us and to assess the quality of the candidates and to hopefully approve them in the end. It's been a path of 4 years, so this doctoral program lasts 4 years. So for these friends of ours, these 3 candidates, it's been almost 5 years since they have started. So it's a big day for them. We're very happy to see them conclude this journey. And therefore, because we are also a little bit behind with schedule, I'm going to start right away. And we will be starting with the first candidate, Luigi Cesarini. Luigi is going to tell us about his research on the potential of machine learning for weather-related risk assessment. Luigi.
I'm not used to microphone, it appears. Okay, good morning, everyone. So nice to see so many familiar faces. I'm Luigi Cesarini, and I'm going to present you part of the work that I did during the 4 years of my PhD, the supervision of Mario Martina and Rui Figueiredo. I'm going to start by giving a general overview of my journey, delving into the main core of the thesis, which are 3 applications, 3 studies, 3 case studies, the identification of extreme events using neural network and support vector machine, then delving into a regression task that entails the forecasting of mass production, comparing different deep learning models, and the classification of images for transmission towers using object detection models. Then concluding with some final reflection and some thanks to the people. I'm going to start by saying that in this thesis, I tried to find some interactions between the 2 big words of weather-related risk and machine learning. As a background, I'm a civil engineer, therefore I'm a little bit more accustomed to the weather-related risk and all the natural hazards that are in this field. It was kind of new getting involved into the machine learning world instead. And this happened thanks to the first application, which is the identification of extreme events for weather indexing. And the opportunity was given under the umbrella of the SMART project, where USE was in charge of developing an innovative framework for weather index insurance and the design of the parameters for these kind of products using machine learning methods. The biggest, let's say, problem with parametric insurance is the basis risk. Basis risk happens when there is a mismatch between the payouts and the real occurrence of a loss. So in the end, we want our model to be always happy in the green, because in other cases where we not identify the event or we identify an event when there is no event, either the insurer or the farmers or the insured, it's not that happy. To do so, we propose a methodology that starts from the data and the different environmental variables coming from different sources that go into data transformation phase, where we try to apply our a priori knowledge before delving into the machine learning framework that eventually will lead us to the events classification. The nice thing about this methodology is that the input data comes from open source datasets, which will make this methodology replicable and applicable in areas where we have no knowledge on the place, on the territory. And the focus of this study is on the floods and droughts and the identification of these events between 2000 and 2011. This is an overview of the rainfall datasets used and the soil moisture used as inputs to the machine learning models. And as a output, instead, we built a catalog of historical events coming from these different sources. And below, you can see the time series of droughts and floods. Droughts in red, which are defined weekly as a temporal resolution, and floods that are defined daily. Instead, the spatial aggregation is still at national level, as well as the climatic variables are aggregated at national level. One important thing about the data that needs to be treated, especially when we deal with extreme events, which are fortunately enough rare by definition, is a class imbalance. If in a year where we have 4 days of floods, we never detected a flood, the models is accurate almost 99% of the time, which would be good, but we are not interested in this kind of accuracy. And to face class imbalance, so we used class weights and oversampling as mode technique, which is a synthetic way to create data. So in the end, we need to pay attention also in the selection of the evaluation criteria using metrics that don't give a lot of weights to the true negative in their computation. The class imbalance, together with the scaling of the data and the splitting of the data, it's an important data pre-processing step before going into the machine learning box, let's say. For this study, we used 2 algorithms, the neural networks and the support vector machine. And these algorithms have a lot of parameters that, oh my God, okay, I don't know what you see. A lot of parameters that can be changed. And so we have a lot of configurations for floods and droughts of models, and we have almost 8,000 configuration for neural networks. Then you can see this number of configurations in the top right. Yeah, in the top right, where there is in the clouds there is any configurations at 1 point, and highlighted are the best models for each method. So the neural network, support vector machine, and logistic regression, which for flood case do a better job with respect to logistic regression. And we can see these also in the tables, where neural networks are more sensitive, while support vector machine are more precise than neural networks, but both are better overall than the logistic regression. I left specificity and accuracy here because with respect to the class imbalance aspect, because you can see that we have very high value of specificity and accuracy, and so there is no discrepancy when there is a true negative in the computation. And we see how these machine learning models are able to, also in the top right, in the bottom right, how the machine learning models are able to increase the performances with increasing information. Similar can be said for droughts, where we have very high metrics, which can be explained maybe by the temporal resolution selected for droughts, which might not be ideal for this kind of natural hazard. Nonetheless, this is true also for logistic regression, and machine learning does a better job. One aspect that I wanted to show you is this, and as a deliverable of the project, I was in charge of developing an app, which was very fun to do. It's online, and you can select a date, and the underlying machine learning model is going to tell you if there is a flood event or a drought event in that day, and it's going to tell you the rainfall for that day, or the SPI in the case of the drought. So I'm going to conclude this part by saying that machine learning do a better job with respect to reducing basis risk with respect to logistic regression and to handle an increasing number of information. Then I discussed briefly the importance of data enhancing technique and select the proper evaluation criteria when we try to evaluate these models. And also, the nice thing is the capability of this model to leverage open data set, which, as I said before, makes this framework replicable in areas where we have no knowledge on the given territory. Of course, there are some limitations, which also lead to future developments. The aggregation at national scale, it's not good, especially for some hazards like floods, that are very local. And for example, we could try a different way to define droughts. That could be a moving threshold or a moving window. And then also try maybe some other machine learning algorithms would be interesting, would lead to similar results. Now, we went from a binary classification to a regression task and the prediction of milk production. and the comparison of deep learning models. So why we were interested in this is because usually there are, in agricultural livestock, there are few years of reliable data. And so when we have these few years and we have short time series, how do deep learning models perform with this short time series? And how good are they? Can they help us improve some risk management practices or create more reliable insurance products? So the methodology is very similar to the one I showed you before. We start from the data. We then move into applying some a priori knowledge before going into the deep learning framework, where we pay close attention to splitting the data correctly in a way that we can use this evaluation correctly in a general framework. This is a collection of deep learning algorithms that I've tested. There are 10 algorithms. It's not there is a lot of information in this table. The important thing is that the SARIMA model we use as a baseline for the deep learning models, and that we can group together, we can cluster together the deep learning models in the artificial network family, recurrent neural network, convolutional neural network, the WaveNet family, and the hybrid, which are models that use both recurrent neural network and convolutional neural network in their architecture. As a case study, we forecast the monthly milk production in France, Germany, and Italy. We selected this country because are among the most productive in Europe, and they have the longest time series. And on the left, you can see the input variables, both from a climatic point of view and economic, like the price, and the output, which is the milk production. Also in this case, the data, the output data were correctly on a national scale. So also the input variables were aggregated at national scale. This was also dictated by the output and maybe how we gathered the data. The training procedure was very simple. We split the data in 60, 20, 20, and we leave 20 for the test part, so in a way that we can see how the model generalized to unseen data. And we evaluate these models with 4 very standard metrics, I would say. I mean absolute error, mean absolute percentage error, the root mean square error, and the coefficient of determination. I'm going to start by showing you some results on on Germany, where in this table is reported the SARIMA models along with the 3 best performing models for Germany. And we can see that the deep learning models do a much better job than the SARIMA model, which can be seen probably also in the time series, where we see how the SARIMA model is basically unable to get peaks and valleys, so it's not very good in the extreme, while the deep learning models do a better job to stay within the range of the ground truth. Instead, slightly different for the Italy, where we have the SARIMA model doing a very good job, as well as the deep learning models. And this can be seen also in the time series, where at the same time, we can see that they are all in the range of the ground truth, but they are not very good in the extremes, which is not a characteristic that bodes well with risk management, of course, because that's what we are interested in. Another very interesting result, at least for me, was the study of the relationship between complexity and performances. I would expect that the high complexity of a model will lead to high performances. And this was not the case for this case study, where artificial neural network and CNN perform better than higher complexity models. We could discuss how the performances and the complexity were assessed. So we assessed the performances as the average of the rank of each models for each metrics, and the complexity was instead assessed as the number of parameters of the models and the training time. So to conclude this part, we saw how the deep learning models are able to give us a better performances on most countries, on all countries actually. And also I wanted to show you 2 cases where in 2 cases where the SARIMA model does very well and that SARIMA model does very bad. Not very bad, that's bad. Still, the deep learning models are able to give us very good prediction. One thing that I didn't have the time to touch upon is the autoregressive nature of the milk production. And this might be due to the fact that we had for a long time the quota lot in place, and we had government subsidized because we don't want the milk production to go, the government, I think, doesn't want the milk production to go to decline too much. But nonetheless, we saw that the artificial neural network and convolutional neural network are more suitable for this kind of prediction with short time series. And finally, that the complexity and the performance is not a linear relationship. and so which would lean into the direction of a better focus on the optimization of the hyperparameters rather than building more complex architecture. The limitations are also in this case, the fact that we work at national scale, it's kind of a limitation, which is also dictated by the output that we have. And the inability to represent correctly the extreme is a problem that could be addressed also by developing some loss functions, some custom loss functions that are more centered on the extremes rather than on reproducing the mean. And finally, it would be very nice to do an application, a similar application to a crop yield. Now, switching a little bit topic, I'm going to show you an application on the classification of image of transmission tower using object detection models. The aim of this was to leverage as much user-generated content as possible using deep learning models and improving, therefore, the exposure of critical infrastructures. We select the power grid lines, and this is important because the exposure is a vital component, as we know, together with hazard and vulnerability, but I think it's a little bit less refined than the other two. And so we propose a methodology that creates an automated start-to-end pipeline that starts from the location of the transmission tower and retrieves the information relevant to this tower. The methodology has two modules, the data module and the deep learning module, that in the end they converge together to the classification of transmission tower. The data module starts from the power grid layer of OpenStreetMap with 40 million towers where we have the georeference of every tower, so longitude and latitude, from which we retrieve the street level imagery from the providers of your choice. And then I use some additional source of data to create routines that are able to remove obstacles in the way of where we want to take the image. So like the road and building layer from OpenStreetMap and the digital elevation model, SRTM. In the deep learning module, instead, we used two algorithms, a single-stage detector, YOLO V5, and the two-stage detector, Detectron2. As for every custom task, for the detection of transmission tower, I had to develop a specific taxonomy for transmission tower and create two data sets for the two tasks that we envisioned, the identification and the classification. On the bottom, you can see the numerosity of the images for each class, and on the right is the classification of the towers, which were made based on the materials, shapes, and thus on the structural behavior, hopefully. As a case study, we selected Porto, mostly because I was there, but also because it is an heterogeneous area and an urban, there you can find rural areas, urban areas, shores, mountains, and there were enough towers and grid lines to check the methodology. The results showed us that both models are actually pretty good. They achieve a good mirror average precision, with the YOLO V5 doing a little bit of difficulty with the mono and the SS1 class, which is an unfortunate name now, I realize. And this could be due to the fact that the low number of images, or the low quality of the image that we have. This is a problem that the Detectron on the right model seems to overcome, actually. So this needs to be a little bit more studied. And achieving a 65 almost of mean average precision over all the classes, which is very much in line with a lot of studies. Another interesting result here is the mean average precision across the scales, which tells us how good is the object detection model in detecting objects of different sizes within the images. So I would expect, as again, a large object to get detected easier than a smaller object. And we see that the detection models does overall a better job than the YOLO V5 model, and especially for small objects that are for the classification task, which might be linked to the other results of the mean average precision. And when we look instead at the spatial distribution of the prediction, we see that overall there is a large portion of detection with high confidence. And we see going from the YOLO V5 to the Detectron map that near the shaded yellow area, which is the urban area support, we see how the confidence of the prediction increase. and almost all the low conference prediction that are in the yellow V5 disappear in the detection too. But yet, there is a need to do a deep dive into the reason of why some of these predictions are missing. To conclude this part, we have this framework was able to unlock access to a large amount of data. OpenStreetMap is honestly huge. And was interesting to see how with a limited number of images, the models were also still able to return some very good performances, and which would lead into the possibility of create new detailed exposure data sets or update existing one when possible. And also was clear the improvements that using a two-stage detector brings to this kind of task. The limitations are, of course, given by the whole built environment in the surrounding, which you might not overcome sometimes. And you might not believe this, but Google is not full of towers images, so it's hard to find towers images related to a certain class. So this is another problem, but which could be overcome by using an unmanned aerial vehicles approach or whatever it is. And would be nice to apply the same methodologies to other objects. We know that in seismic risk assessment is used for buildings. Would be nice to apply to bridges too, to dams, to levee, and whatnot. And I'm going to say a few words, very general words. Also during the review processes of articles, I found out a little bit of friction against machine learning approaches from our sector, let's say, from our fields. And this seems to me like is a way to, these two approaches, a more classical approach, a machine learning approach can coexist with no problems. And also I found myself being a huge supporter of open datasets apparently, since all the three studies have the same goal of using this kind of open datasets. Which leads maybe to the last point of this, which is we don't have very good data. I have found very difficult to find good data, which is probably related to the open datasets part. And then I'm going to spend a couple of minutes some people for this. It's been a very tumultuous year, let's say, to put it this way. I'm going to start from the reviewers of the thesis. Did an insightful job. So thank you. And it's been still. And I want to thank my beautiful girlfriend, and she's been incredible, even in this period where I've been up a bitch. And she's been supportive morally, physically. If I'm here standing doing something physically, it's also thanks to her. Ao Rui, ao Javier. Sou muito obrigado pelo tempo passado no Porto. About Rui, he's a incredible researcher, and he's been an incredible experience. I'm thankful that I was able to learn from him even if he went back to Porto, which was kind of a bum. And I want to thank Marcello. It's been insane in this years. Poi voglio ringraziare la mia famiglia, che alcuni sono e poi come diceva giustamente, ma come farò mai a ringraziarvi, a ripagare? Non credo potrò, e onestamente spero anche di no da un certo punto di vista. Last but not least, Mario. I know the 30 seconds I'm gonna. Like another, it's been the experience of my life so far. Which is, you never know. And amazed by the scientific acumen which shines to the human being that he is. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Luigi. impressively, saving us 6 minutes or 7 minutes, more or less. So that's also been from the I haven't mentioned their names. I will mention them now. So we will start with Dr. Anna Rita Scorzini from University of L'Aquila, and if there are other questions as well, Dr. Chiara Arrighi from Università di Firenze, Dr. Massimiliano Pasqui from the Institute. Please.
No, there's a microphone. Thank you. No, I think.
First, with a general question on the use of machine learning algorithms. Results provided by these models. Do you think that these models can also provide useful insights on the physical processes or mechanism behind the problems?
Thank you for the question. It's, yes, it is a problem, the black box approach, nature of models. And the ability to understand a parameter physical way, but have some, for example, the partial dependency plot or the shape values. Not, I don't know, the size of a pipe like we're used to. Might be related to, okay, temperature is better than relative humidity. It's more important for cyclones, I'm saying. This is to, so going towards that direction, working on that, and so probably I will need PhD to do this. But I think whenever you use
weather index.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if.
And basically you plotted the F1 score versus the different combination of the input parameters considered in the models. And we can see that for the machine learning algorithms, not always the accuracy, the performances of the model improve with the increasing number of input parameters. And this seems to say that it would be possibly more important the quality of the data, the representativeness of the data, rather than their quantity. Can you comment on that? And do you have some explanation for this pattern, which were also different between the flood and the draft case?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that this is, like, for example, a practical example of how feature importance would be used, because I came to the realization of the partial dependency and feature importance a little bit later, because maybe some interpretability measures will tell us which kind of datasets is better than the others, and we could remove the less representative or less good datasets to this. So that could be the reason, and some of this information could be redundant. There is also a limitation of this because it was the rainfall dataset and then the soil moisture was added to the combination. So it's not all the combination, as I said, this is rainfall plus the soil moisture. So it could be that some layer of the soil moisture are less important than others. So the deeper layers could be more important for the droughts, or the shallow layers are more important for the floods. This is the main importance and the main reason that I could think of, together with, as I said, it would be very interesting to do a feature importance analysis where we could remove those negligible data sets, or that doesn't bring important. Sorry.
I finally have a curiosity regarding last application.
Yeah.
And can you give us some information on the workload for model implementation, computational times, about model implementation and the data preparation?
Okay. That depends a little bit on how many GPUs you have. Because
in your case,
just in my case, I was able to train the models on the Google Colab GPUs, and since I have a limit of 8 hours, I had to do 2 batches. So 8 hours, stop the training, do another up to, I don't remember exactly how much time. But the GPUs of Google's are good, but they're not exceptional, or, you know. So if you have a better GPUs, you might be much faster or not. But let's say it's 1 day for training the model. And actually the most laborious part is the find yourself into the OpenStreet data map, which is now, for me at least, is done. So now it takes a few times. So the whole pipeline, I would say that training the models is up to 2 days, kind of, in an area like the Porto area. So if you start and doing the Europe, of course, it's going to be different. But
thank you very much. I'm done.
thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Well, I noted 3 questions and 2 have already been posed by Anna Rita, so I might ask you the last one that is related to the milk production,
Yeah.
which is a nice case study, which I'm not familiar with, but you highlighted an interesting point, that is the inability to represent the extremes.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if this challenge in representing extremes, it's because intrinsically extremes are rare event and you have less training chances and less training data, or it might be due to something else, like the autoregressive behavior of the process you are trying to describe.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. For sure, it's true that we have the extremes are, especially the very extremes. So within the variability within the year, it's able to represent it very well. When we have higher extremes, it's where it's going a bit, it has a little bit of difficulty. But as I said before, I think milk is a particular case where we have in the production, we have this, especially in Europe, we had throughout the years, these kind of systems in place, like the quota system to, you know, have a sort of, you know, I don't want to say standard milk production, but it never goes too down. It only goes a little bit up, but only in certain countries, because certain countries like Italy have the quota system, and so you couldn't produce too much. And then they removed this, and for example, this is maybe a problem of the study, like the test part is done also in the in the last years. So, which the quota latte system doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, and also like the models could be a little bit train towards the extreme events. So select certain loss function, selecting certain parameters that are more addressed towards the extremes rather than the simple. Then maximizing the reproducibility, the ability to predict the time series.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luigi, for your presentation. Your work is really, really interesting. I was wondering if you explore the variability of the precipitation data set for the first case, since you mentioned different data sets,
yeah.
but the way in which each of them is representing precipitation is really different. And so when you are linking this information with the risk and damages, some of them could be not relevant for, let me say, describe the impact. So I was wondering if you could comment this heterogeneity in the data sets according to your work.
Found in the literature that using multiple data sets would be in a way able to cover some of the limitations of the data sets, so balance themselves, like in an ensemble way, I wouldn't say, but we analyze a little bit before applying them to very standard metrics like the total annual average, total annual precipitation, the mean precipitation, all this stuff to see how many disparities were there. And at the end, also another big problem, another problem with this is that they have different resolutions, which is, it's kind of a problem. But at the end, we thought that having this at country level, which is yet another limitations, would overcome these kind of problems and would give us a little bit of more balance in the rainfall patterns. And that, as I showed you in the app, they are different, but especially, at least I saw most of the events, they are able to represent the events rather correctly, most of them. So that is why we kept all of them.
Thank you very much for the answer. Just another question, comment. Regarding the droughts and the impact on droughts, could you take or could you comment a little bit more about the relation between how the index on drought is related to the impact? So, in order to evaluate the risk, how it is linked, the relationship between the index regarding the drought and the impact that is analyzed and modeled.
Yeah. So in this case, we didn't really look at the impact actually. So it was the aim of this was to create a methodology that identify the events, which is kind of a way to substitute the triggers in a way. Because in parametric insurance now, I don't know, if there are 100 millimeters of rainfall, or we have the parameter is triggered. And so it was a way to overcome this, having a threshold and having a model that is going to tell you directly just, okay, now we are in a situation where you have to pay the farmer or the institutions for them. So we didn't really look at the kind of impact that there is with drought, the relation between drought and impact, actually. So I didn't really have this, because as of now, we see it's mostly defined with an SPIs or some indexes. Here, instead, it's trying to put together some more information and give an overall assessment of the droughts. So, I don't know. I don't think I answered the questions, but...
Thank you very much.
Thank you, the jury, for the questions, and thank you, Luigi, once again. Okay, moving on to the second candidate, Riccardo Giusti, who will be presenting his research work on a NATEC assessment framework, environmental risk due to tank collapses triggered by flood.
Sorry. So, I am Riccardo Giusti. Good morning, everybody. This is my PhD thesis title that is focused on NATEC and the consequence of NATEC events. So, let's start. This is a brief, we will see a brief introduction regarding how was developed, and we will see 3 phases, and then final conclusion. So, what is NATEC event? What is NATEC? The first definition regards define NATEC as technological accident triggered by natural hazard or disaster. But a more recent definition from Cruz 2019 involves in this in the original definition also the involving of releases of hazardous materials. Globally, there is a growing trend in NATEC events, and then was saved by recent literature by Ricci in 2021. Now we will see how and why NATEC are so characteristic and peculiar. NATEC are high impact, low probability scenario, also known as HILP. They are cascading events, and this cascading event can generate a typical scenario that can be different respect the concept of major accident that Seveso directive define. So NATEC are cascading events generated by domino effect. This means propagation and escalation, and escalation can lead to damage across a wide area. Moreover, NATEC events could lead to environmental contamination, as seen in 2021 from literature. And another fact that is really important is the emergency response can be handled NATEC event, because maybe often they are struggling with the natural hazard, and the specific safety barrier often are not designed to withstand NATEC events. So these are the 3 phases. I developed my PhD thesis. In the first phases, we will see the assessment of NATEC and risk. NATEC and risk is a new paradigm I created in order to figure out and assess all the risk chain from natural hazard, technological vulnerability, and environmental consequence. Then phase 2, we will see the development of fragility curves for storage tanks in flood-prone area. And phase 3, we will see, I will show you how to use a neural network approach in order to assess tank vulnerability. So these are the goals of phase 1. Our principal goal, main goal, is to figure out the consequence, so the escalation of NATEC events in terms of cost to remediate environmental contamination in soil and groundwater. Since this is the main goal, we use and create a novel risk chain for NATEC scenario triggered by flood. I hope you see. On the right, there is the risk flow, the novel risk chain that conceive all the risk chain from natural hazard to technological vulnerability, and then we figure out the impacts. This risk chain utilize existing methods. For tank vulnerability, we use recent method for assessing storage tank, respect buckling and legislating failure that are the common failure during a flood for storage tank. And then also for environmental consequences, I use another method. All this risk chain was implemented in a GIS environment, and I will utilize this novel risk chain in a real case study. This is the case study. There is a map. I hope that it's more or less visible, or at least trust me. This is a map of the case study. The case study was in the area of potentially significant flood risk of Secure River. That is an acronym, APFSR, that is defined by the flow directive. So I utilized a real flood scenario, and tank data was retrieved from regional database. So I use real diameter of the tanks and assume the tank height, because and then you can see also how is mapping the environmental consequence on the area. And this methods, it's the first method applicable over large area, such as a PFSR. So, and also it's possible to mapping vulnerable thanks to the existing methods and the risk chain that I develop. So these are the other results in monetary term. These are divided on the epsilon axis in columns between the flood scenario, 500 return period years and 200 return periods. And in the row, there are another variable that is crucial, that is tank filling level, because we didn't know prior the tank filling levels, so the risk chain I develop, I use it for different tech probability, so different filling level, as you can see. And this is crucial because from 20% of filling level to 60%, the damage, the total damage over the area, you can see in the map on the left, could change a lot, also 100 times. So again, the methodology identify also the highest damage values in the industrial area that is in the southwest part of the PFSR that represent the main city of the area, that is Modena. Again, another very short test regarding the monetary damage was applied on the monetary damage in our risk chain. So in the x-axis, you can see each dot represents a tank, and for each dot in the x-axis, there is the value, the monetary value for environmental remediation for our proposed risk chain methodology. And in epsilon axis, there is another methodology from literature that link the remediation cost directly to the volume that spill over the tank that can collapse. And the comparison is good, and there is a good fitting between the two, to our method and the other methods from literature. So now let's start with phase 2 with development fragility curve for above storage tank. Yes. This fragility curve regards unanchored tanks. We consider different tank collapsing dynamics. The dynamics are buckling, that is the deformation of the shell of the tank, rigid sliding, overturning, and floating. Our main goal here, my main goal here, is to analyze tank behavior with different slenderness ratios. Slenderness is just the ratio between age and radius of the tank. Stored liquid density, of course, filling level, as we already see in phase 1. These are the table or our hypothesized tanks. Slenderness is highlighted. I created a database with different tanks with different capacity, and inside the same capacity, I utilize different type of slenderness and also of liquid storage density. Another assumption in order to create these fragility curves are that flow depth and flow velocity are related through the Manning equations. So flow velocity is equal to the square root of flow velocity, of flow depth, sorry. These are on the right the conceptual model of the damage for the tanks, for the 4 dynamics we assess here. And just to mention that overturning dynamic was not considered in the literature, was not a method consolidated in the literature, so we apply a simple equilibrium momentum to the tank in order to obtain a curve also for overturning. We evaluated 18 different tanks for 4 different failure dynamics that lead us to generate more than 500 curves in total. These are examples. I apologize, maybe you can see the curves, but these are the curves for buckling. Buckling is one of the first dynamic can activate since the lowest flow depth, and just see all the curves for all the dynamics, and I will give you just the insight from this result that filling level is the critical parameter inside the same as operational parameter scenario, and inside the same tank is the crucial parameter. But also we will see quite well that the smaller tanks are more vulnerable due to their geometry, and of course slenderness play an important role, as you can see before, sorry, that a wide tank is really more vulnerable respect a slender tank. And again, just to finish here, floating and overturning have a really similar behavior, and thanks also to a deep literature review, it seems, and the curves I think demonstrate this, floating and overturning, maybe one can trigger other of vice versa. Here are the correlation plots regarding the 6 input variable for tank vulnerability, and the x-axis there is the 4 different dynamic. So again, the tank geometry plays a fundamental role in tank resistance against float. Tank height, the height of the tank is the most important geometric characteristic affecting tank resistance. But for overturning, it seems that tank diameter is more important. It's slightly more important than tank height. Well, here, phase 3. In phase 3, we train and calibrate neural network models utilizing the data that stand that we use and created the vulnerability curves we see in phase 1. This was due to the fact that we want to realize a fast assessment of financial tank over ledge area, consider all the 4 dynamics as we consider in the phase 2. And again, we apply the neural network models to the case study of phase 1 and compare to the literature methodology in order to test it. Neural network models were developed using the 6 variables we see before, so diameter, height, filling level, liquid density, tank float height, and float velocity. This is how I developed the neural network for buckling, sliding, and floating overturning. It's quite simple to develop. I use more than 6,000 data. Then the tank vulnerability curve dataset were used to train and test the neural network. The result of this neural network is that he gives you the figure of the probability of tank failure. Between 0 to 1, 1 fail, 0 not fail. Just an easy neural network to give a fast assessment for probability. These are the results of the case study. You can see on the graph is the flow depth versus the tank vulnerability. Red dots represent our model, the neural network model. Giant dots represent the literature model. They have the similar behavior. So, of course, my model, neural network model, overestimate respect the literature method some tank failure, but this is due to the fact that we consider 4 types of tank dynamic of tank collapsing. So it's more conservative for vulnerability assessment. And this scenario was, the scenario we will see here is regarding the 500 years return period flood scenario and the 20% Finley level as operational variable parameter. Again, here is the same graph, but with the flood velocity. I put this graph just to give you an insight that also with low flood velocity between 0.25 meter per second to 1, some tanks can collapse and generate an attack event. So threshold for high probability of failure, in this case of 20% of Finley level, is set for value greater than 0.5 meter per second flood velocity and 1 meter of flood height. Well, I'm quite fast, seems. So final conclusion. I divided final conclusion between phases. Phase 1, the assessment of NATEC and risk. We created an overview risk chain that describe all the consequence in terms of environmental contamination. Try to describe it's a new paradigm for me that is called NATEC-ENV. And it's the first time in literature for NATEC to assessing consequences and mapping for at least environmental consequences, environmental contamination. So, but there are some limitations. To do this risk chain, we use a high number of variables, but also many assumptions. I consider no safety measure, and the environmental model is oversimplified respect the reality because I did not consider the possible transport of the contaminant. So the future development, of course, could be an environmental model improved, and also we can create another step forward, considering cost-benefit analysis for mitigation measure. Well, phase 2, we create the fragility curves, and we try to describe the behaviors for each dynamic and the relationship with the input parameter and the dynamics. So we found a relationship for different dynamics, like, as I said before, overturning and floating. So the pro of this phase is we analyze the 4 dynamics together. We found out that also in flood hazard, tank slenderness is a crucial parameter in flood contexts. And yeah, the limitation here are that we consider only unanchored tanks, and we do not consider other dynamics that are less, they are quite rare, but they can happen, like pipe detachment or debris. So these, for sure, are the things that can improve this phase. And for phase 3, we propose a novel methodology using neural network for assessing the vulnerability. The results in the case study are quite accurate, so it could be used, trained and used with a good accuracy. So in order to create a quick procedure, neural network models in this case works. So the results are promising, and they are applicable over large area. The limitation, of course, we do not have real data. They are missing. There are very few data and not so reliable about tank collapsing during flood. And of course, as we mentioned before in Luigi's presentation, neural networks are considered our black box. So these are limitations for sure. Future developments here, for sure, are try to retrieve real data and calibrate better models over also bigger data set. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Riccardo. We are now ahead of schedule, so always good news. So I will now give the floor for questions to the jury, starting with Chiara Righi.
Thank you, Riccardo, for your introduction. I have several questions, but I will start with the one. I really appreciate the idea of going beyond the NATEC framework by adding environmental consequences, because NATEC usually considers specifically a plant or a tank or something focusing on the risk related to that specific plant and not considering what can trigger in the environment. So I really appreciate that you are trying to go beyond this, let's say, current state of the art. But what here as environmental consequence. You described the environmental consequence as the cost to remediate the environmental damage, okay? And my question is about what are the possible other costs that you do not do. Remediation is one important thing in terms of other intangible impacts that are not still considered.
Intangible a contamination NATEC could be very different, I think, but just have an example came in my mind. The contaminant can reach a river. Damage there could be intangible, of course, because about ecosystem and the life of aquatic life. And this could be, yeah, one of the worst things could happen in this case that I didn't mention, and was not the purpose of my consequence. But of course, it could be, the model can be integrated as well with other type of consequence in terms of environmental impacts, of course. I want to figure out this type of radiation in terms of soil and hydrogeology. I was attached to my background, and I try to study that part better and figure out valuatory money, as I did, as you see, like a bit blurry, sorry, and because a contamination, a closure. In my previous job, sites where the company due to the fact that there was not NATEC, there was just derived from man-made problem, lead to closing all the site and move another part. So also this can be a serious and yeah.
Okay, so you agree with me that ecology matters when you want to extend the framework to NATEC? Should be one day considered, because today we are not able to fully quantify these consequences, but maybe in future we could do that. I have a second question, which is related to what you considered as affected area in case of tank collapse, and the area that you consider is affected by the. And if I remember well from the thesis, you consider a sort of buffer of the tank. So the question is, can you comment a little bit on this assumption and about the potential the contaminant in case of tank?
Yeah, in order to a risk chain and apply it in a real case study and overlay all this risk chain required a simple so I used a method that was applied for a camion that deliver gasoline, overturning in the street and spill out all the gasoline. So, which is this incident that is transport, but in case of the case study I use, for example, of course, variables are many, are numerous, so, and a model of transport, contaminant transport in fluid water, very struggling. Very much complexes, maybe not so accurate and precise. I think that this kind of detailed transport model have another scale of use for this risk chain. It could be used after you did this and see where are the problems, where are the issue, the possible consequence.
And maybe, I don't know how many questions, but I have one very quick question. Maybe not quick the question, not the answer. Filling level. You say that filling level is one of the most sensitive parameters in all the process, of course, both from the vulnerability side and also for the environmental consequences, because the amount of can change. Perspective to apply this kind of analysis to like the areas at potential significant flood risk. How for a systematic application, given that filling level is such a sensitive parameter?
Yeah, I didn't stay too much on filling level because it's a very tough field of probability. Some authors in their use probability distribution of filling level. A scenario using this probability distribution. The problem is that I think you can use it could be to see how the damage, the impacts between each filling level. As you see, the amount of damage can really change between 6% filling level and 6%. It's 100. It's my risk chain in my case study that is not the best one, but I think that this is crucial term, but also for systematic use of this could be improved, also verifying kind of the main type of filling level, the main value of filling level. So from 20%, like 60%, 70%. And I think that could be a good mode, a good in order to have a totally figure of the area and the possible impacts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Riccardo, for your presentation. I had the same question on the filling level, so I would skip another problem, which is related to the obtaining information on the geometry of the tanks. Do you see any possible approach to derive this information on geometry and characteristics of the storage tank indirectly by deriving information from other data sources which are not directly available, for example, in databases? This data from other sources by making some work on the rough data. I don't know if the question is clear.
Yeah, more or less it's clear. I try to. You will start if it's okay. I use, as I said before, the database from Geoportale of Emilia-Romagna. That is quite good and it's quite refined. It's quite updated. I try also to use OpenStreetMaps, but with OpenStreetMaps, sometimes there are, it was bigger to investigate, and for the regional database, there are already, there have already done a distinction between industrial feature. It was easy to use, to clean, and then some easy calculus inside the feature, like boldness, keep out all the feature that was maybe I overestimated the number of tanks, and this was a case study, and maybe many of the tanks that were smaller were anchor tanks. In order to create and test the procedure, I overtake this problem and use this method and this data. I didn't try other raw data because it could lead to a procedure like object analysis and satellite images. It's a very big field of research, but I was not focused on that part because more or less the data are there. I have to clean up and measure from the feature. So maybe error will be in the meter, but I will suppose maybe could use quite in an easy way and a fast way DTM and DSM in order to get the height of the tank in a verified so see.
Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ricardo, for your presentation. I was wondering if your strategy, your method could be, let me see, apply in a sort of quasi-real-time mode. I'm thinking about the potential impact of not on something which really happened, but something that could be, as we did just a few weeks ago in Romagna, close to Ravenna place, in an industrial plant. So I was wondering if you comment, or if you describe how your environmental analysis methods could be applied in a real-time mode.
That's a good point, I think. That's a good point. Also, inside this presentation, there was an image regarding the 2 tanks that were overturning in Romagna in the last event of Romagna flood 2 weeks ago. I think that could be really applicable in a near forecasting, but in near real time. The problem here for flood is that we have to know the driving force prior. So you have to figure out, just to take the example of Romagna, many levees collapsed and generate a flooded area that are not conceived in the map I use, because the map I use from a PFSR, from the public agency, consider only the overtopping of the levee, not the collapsing. So the height can change in that site. Also, sites that are outside maybe the flood area for the overtopping are inside the flooding area for collapsing. But of course, with a conservative model or something very smart in terms of hydraulic engineer can be adapting to obtain the driving force, and can use this type of risk chain in order to maybe get aware that company 100 silos, 100 tank, to keep your tank full, because maybe full arrive, yes, for sure, could be really useful. Because when arrive the flood, or when you are 1 hour prior the flood, maybe the emergency workers are not there to fill the tanks. That was happened and was by the events. So, yeah, that's a very good point.
Thank you very much.
Very well. Thank you once again, Ricardo.
Yeah. Just, I want to thank you, all the Charisma people, Mario, Marcello, special to Marcello, Luigi, Beatrice, all the Charisma, Marco too, my family, my girlfriends. It was very great journey for 4 years, almost 5. So thanks a lot again to you all. Ciao.
I did say it was an important day, right, at the beginning. So, and now the last candidate of the morning, Wadzita Scott. Wadzita is going to present her work on skill assessment of subseasonal forecast of extreme precipitation events over Italy. Wadzita.
Africans. Buongiorno a tutti, sono Rosita Scott. After 4 years in Italy, that's probably the only perfect thing I know to say in Italian. But my research, speaking about Italy, my research is on the scale assessment of subseasonal forecasts of extreme precipitation events over Italy. Okay. I will first introduce to you why extreme precipitation events, then I'll present some background information. This will be followed by the aim of the research, and then I'll present the data, methodology, and results for the first part of the research that deals with the drivers of extreme precipitation events. I will then present the data, methodology, and results for the second part of the research that deals with the subseasonal scale. We will tie it all up with a brief discussion and end it off with the conclusion. Now, why extreme precipitation events? This is because they pose a threat to the society. They may result in flooding and landslides, which may negatively affect the environment, which may cause loss of lives, loss of money. Because of Italy's peculiar location within the Mediterranean Sea, it experienced a lot of extreme precipitation events. Just recently, last month in May, there was the huge flooding in the Emilia-Romagna region, where approximately 8 persons died and thousands evacuated their homes. This is an example of the fatalities and damages as a result of flooding and landslides associated with extreme precipitation. Now, precipitation forecasts are particularly important to those decision makers whose primary aim is to help reduce risks associated with potential floods and landslides. And these decision makers depend on reliable forecasts to make informed choices on whether to enact plans of action to mitigate the negative effects of a natural disaster such as floods. Many of them use weather forecasts. These are forecasts of the state of the atmosphere out to 2 weeks. For example, is it going to rain tonight or is it going to rain on Sunday? But what about forecasting beyond 2 weeks? For example, this can surely help to enact extra response planning by the Civil Protection Department to mitigate flood right here in Italy. So, what about forecasting extreme precipitation events on a subseasonal timescale? What is the subseasonal timescale? Starting with weather forecasts. These are forecasts of daily values out to 14 days in advance. Then we have the subseasonal forecasts, which are forecasts of weekly averages out to 2 weeks to 2 months in advance. There you have the seasonal forecasts. These are forecasts of the monthly or the seasonal averages 3 months to 12 months in advance. For example, what about the spring season, March, April, May? It looks as if it will be either wetter than normal season or lower than normal season for rainfall. Then you have the climate predictions, which are predictions of the 30-year climatology out to 10 years to centuries in advance. So seasonal forecasts are forecasts of weekly averages between 2 weeks to 2 months, and their forecast scale is lower than weather forecasts. Weather forecasts depend on initial conditions of the atmosphere, while that for the subseasonal forecast depends on initial conditions along with information from the ocean and the soil moisture. Subseasonal forecast prediction as well is in its infancy stage and it's still developing. Subseasonal to seasonal prediction project, the S2S project, began in 2013, and this project created a database which now houses subseasonal forecasts from from 12 centers from around the world, including from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, the ECMWF. Precipitation is difficult to simulate and to forecast for several reasons. For example, depends on the atmospheric circulation and also on the orography. Results from some research had compared several of the S2S models in the database and had found that the ECMWF subseasonal models perform better than some of the other models. Research have also found that subseasonal prediction forecast scale is limited to 2 weeks. So the aim of this research is to identify other atmospheric variables besides precipitation that are associated with extreme precipitation events that can be used to extend forecast lead time beyond 2 weeks. But first, it seeks to understand the drivers of extreme precipitation events for improving prediction. And it does this by characterizing the extreme precipitation event with regards to these circulation patterns. Let's look at the drivers of extreme precipitation events by examining the large-scale patterns. Extreme precipitation events were identified by using the EOBS observational precipitation forecast. The period of assessment is between from 1990 to 2020, looking at the usual seasons, winter, spring, summer, autumn, and at each grade point, the wet days were retained. These are days with precipitation greater than 1 millimeter. And from here, they were used to calculate the 99 wet day percentiles. So an extreme precipitation event is identified when a day records precipitation greater than this 99 percentile. To examine the circulation patterns associated with the extreme precipitation events, the ERA 5 reanalysis dataset was utilized. This is because it contained other variables of interest that was not present in the EOBS. And these included the sea level pressure, the geopotential height at 500 hectopascal, and the specific humidity and wind at 850 hectopascal. For each season, the climate variables were averaged for all the extreme, where the extreme precipitation days occurred, and were used to calculate the anomalies for each season. The research also looked at examining the teleconnection links between the extreme precipitation events here in Italy and with the North Atlantic Oscillation. It also investigated a teleconnection link with the Mediterranean Oscillation. Here we have the mean sea level pressure and the geopotential height anomaly at 500 hectopascal anomalies. The shaded area is the mean sea level pressure and the contours are the geopotential height. What we see is that the extreme precipitation events are characterized by a well-defined anomalous low pressure in all seasons. It is deepest in winter, DJF, and weakest in summer, JJA. The low pressure system favors instability because this instability results in intense precipitation. These plots show the specific humidity and wind at 850 anomalies, where the vectors are for the wind and the shade are specific humidity. And the extreme precipitation events are characterized by anomalous positive humidity values, along with the anomalous cyclonic flow over the Western Mediterranean. Previously, where we saw the anomalies for the geopotential height, they also over the Western Mediterranean region. So continuing, you could see that in winter, there's a moisture trail that extends from the subtropical North Atlantic all the way into the Mediterranean region. And to a lesser extent, it's in summer. In summer, the extreme precipitation events are selected will depend more on the local scale features. So next, is there a link between the NAO and the extreme precipitation events in Italy? So the NAO is basically a phenomenon over the North Atlantic Ocean where there's fluctuation in the differences of the pressure at sea level between the low in the north and the high in the south. We have plots that shows the distribution of the NOAA index for each season, and which is the blue line, and the red line is the NOAA index associated with the days where extreme precipitation events occurred. What is noticed that is for winter, there's a slight shift towards negative values. So here we can see that there's a slight statistical significance for a shift towards the negative NO for the extreme precipitation events that occur during winter. The negative phase during winter for the NO the negative NO phase during winter favors storminess within the region for the Mediterranean. Next, is there a link between the Mediterranean oscillation and the extreme precipitation events in Italy? So the Mediterranean oscillation is a phenomenon over the Western Mediterranean. It is the difference between the pressure recorded between the Western and the Eastern Mediterranean, where during the positive phase of the MO, you have high pressure system over the Western Mediterranean, while during the negative phase of the Mediterranean oscillation, there's a low pressure system over the Western Mediterranean. Looking at the plots, they're similar to the NAO, but for these, they're for the MO. And what we see is that there is a significant shift towards more negative values with the Mediterranean oscillation, where the shift is greatest in winter and weakest in summer. So the Mediterranean oscillation is significantly more than the NAO with the occurrence of extreme precipitation events. And during the negative during the negative phase of the Mediterranean oscillation, you have the low pressure, which favors, again, instability in the atmosphere that causes intense precipitation. Let's look at forecasts. And we're going to look at added value by forecasting circulation patterns associated with the extreme precipitation events. We choose to validate the ECMW sub-seasonal reforecast. These are issued every Mondays and Thursdays, and they're forecast out to 46 days. They are available for the last 20 years. The Euro 5 reanalysis data set was used as the reference data to validate the sub-seasonal model. Due to the extent of the circulation pattern associated with the extreme precipitation event from the previous shown results, the forecast for the mean sea level pressure and the geopotential height were validated over the same domain, while that for specific humidity were validated over a smaller domain, because here the interest is on the humidity values which are of interest to Italy. And the precipitation forecasts were validated only over Italy. A total of 100 extreme precipitation events were selected as case studies. And these were selected from the period 2001 to 2020, the availability of the ECMWF sub-seasonal forecast. These extreme precipitation events were identified in both the Euro 5 and the EOBS precipitation data set, and they also included some of the most intense events. The mean sea level pressure and the geopotential height variables were averaged, while the precipitation and the specific humidity variables were accumulated over a 5-day period centered on the day of occurrence of the extreme precipitation event. A deterministic assessment was first conducted, and the verification metric used for this was the anomaly correlation coefficient, the ACC. Here, we're looking at how good the forecast is at reproducing the anomaly patterns associated with the extreme precipitation events. So scale is assessed where the ACC is greater than 0. Next, the probabilistic assessment was also conducted. Here, tercile probabilities were calculated. These are forecasts of the likelihood of an event occurring in one category, which is equally probable category, which are defined as the normal, the white area, below normal, which is the blue area, or above normal, which is the red shaded area. Now, stay with me here. The verification metric used for the probabilistic assessment, we use the area under the curve. Here it is looking at the forecast ability to discriminate against events and non-events. Below, you have an illustration of an ROC curve for forecast. The black line is the ROC curve, and the shaded area is known as the area under the curve is known as the area under the curve. If the forecast is perfect, the black line would run along the blue line, and the AUC will equal to 1. If the line was to instead run along the red diagonal line, the AUC will equal to 0.5, and the forecast has no discrimination. It is unable to discriminate between an event and a non-event. So, scale is assessed where the AUC is greater than 0.5. Now, it is exceedingly difficult for subseasonal forecasts for precipitation to forecast weeks with extremely high precipitation totals. So first step is to look at how good it is to forecast a week with above normal rainfall where an extreme precipitation event occurs. For the plots on the x-axis, we have the fraction of extreme precipitation events that had AUC, the ACC greater than 0 and the AUC greater than 0.5. And on the y-axis, you have the lead range at where these were attained. The forecast is said to be skillful when the ACC is greater than 0 and the AUC greater than 0.5 for 50% or more of the extreme precipitation events. So here we see that for the ACC, we see that for the subseasonal precipitation forecast, that the model had no reproducibility scale in reproducing the positive anomalies for precipitation. But it was able to discriminate, it was able to forecast weeks with above normal rainfall out to 2 weeks in advance. For the mean sea level pressure, the model was unable to reproduce, the model had no scale in reproducing the negative anomalies pattern associated with the extreme precipitation events. Looking at if the model was able, though, to discriminate those weeks with lower than normal mean sea level pressure, again associated with the extreme precipitation events, out to 3 weeks for autumn and winter, 4 weeks for summer, and 5 weeks for spring. For the geopotential height, the subseasonal forecast was able to reproduce the negative geopotential height anomalies out to 2 weeks. And for the AUC, the forecast, for the probability forecast, I should say, for below normal geopotential heights, the forecast was able to discriminate out to 3 weeks and 4 weeks in spring. Looking at specific humidity here, it was also able to reproduce the positive specific humidity anomalies out to 2 weeks in advance, except for summer. This could probably be because in summer, the precipitation events, the extreme precipitation events that were selected were more due to the local scale factors. Looking at the AUC, you see that the subseasonal forecast model was able to discriminate weeks with above normal specific humidity variables out to 3 weeks in advance. So here we see that the probabilistic skill assessment is better than the deterministic skill assessment. And here you see that for spring, especially for mean sea level pressure, the lead time is long. This is because the extreme precipitation events, the atmosphere, there's more information retained from the initial condition and from the longer time scale features associated with these extreme precipitation events. Now, let's have a brief discussion. Here is a framework presented by the RII Institute on how you can use forecasts at different time scales for disaster risk reduction, where you monitor the different forecasts, and when there's information of a potential hazard, there are actions you can enact for the disaster managers. And as time goes nearer to this potential hazard, you refine these actions and you put the risk in context of the current state. This is an inflatable flood barrier, which was tested in the municipality of the Riviera region and tested on the river, the Trisinaro River. And it was able to hold back the flood waters for several days. So let's see how we can put this in context of the framework that was just presented. So you start by monitoring, say, the disaster manager monitor the seasonal forecast. And say that it says that there's a high probability, for the spring season, March, April, May, there's a high probability that the spring season, will be more wetter than usual. So you start by checking the stocks for these inflatable barriers. As you move to in spring, you monitor the subseasonal forecast. Right, you monitor the subseasonal forecast and say like 3 weeks out, it's the forecast said that a particular week, there's a high probability that the precipitation and the specific humidity variables forecast will be higher than normal, and along with the geopotential and the mean sea level pressure being lower than normal, you prepare the inflatable flood barriers. So as you approach closer to the week, you continue monitoring the weather forecasts. And if the weather forecasts say the next day extreme precipitation will occur, you go, whoops, and activate those inflatable flood barriers. So in conclusion, the extreme precipitation events in Italy are characterized by anomalous low negative mean sea level pressure and geopotential height at 500 hectopascal, along with anomalous high specific humidity at 850 over the Western Mediterranean. The wintertime extreme precipitation events are linked to the negative phase of the NEO, but it's slight. But there's a more significant link, which I'm quite excited about, between the negative Mediterranean oscillation phase and the extreme precipitation events in all seasons. So the negative Mediterranean Oscillation Index can be used as a predictability tool for predicting extreme precipitation events in Italy. The subseasonal probabilistic forecast of mean sea level pressure, geopotential height, and specific humidity, along with precipitation, can help to extend the predictability of extreme precipitation events over Italy beyond 2 weeks out to 3 weeks lead time. And there is added value in using these subseasonal forecasts to help enact actions for disaster risk reduction. Thank you for listening, and I would like to say thanks to everyone who has supported me in whatever way, big, small, in my PhD journey. I would like to thank my support system in the Caribbean, US, Canada, UK, and right here in Italy. Thanks to my mother for her many prayers, and the greatest thanks to my father, the late Cecil Merton-Scott, who taught his kids from a very young age that having an education is powerful and to continuously seek to improve oneself, something that we have all internalized and have now passed on to our own children and our own kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wazita. Let's start with the discussion by the jury with Massimiliano Pasqui.
Thank you very much, Wazita, for your presentation and for your clarity and clarifying the very intriguing aspect of subseasonal forecast. I have a couple of questions regarding the way in which it was identified the extreme precipitation events. Could you please add some words in terms of, or clarify a little bit more what is your feeling regarding the possibility of having, let me say, multi-days events or regime or precipitation regime longer than 1 day. So what's your feeling about identifying events over a longer time scale in terms of more than 1 day, or in terms of one single event made about more than 1 day of extreme precipitation?
I hope I understand your question well. So, over more than 1 day, the subseasonal forecast can be used, say, for extreme events, for extreme precipitation events that occur over 2 days and longer than 1 day. You can you can monitor these forecasts where looking at the weeks. Okay, let me try this again. You're looking at the weeks in which the week is the high probability that the precipitation is greater. I would say my feeling here is that while my research is on extreme precipitation, looking at, it's not one, it can actually be used for monitoring these longer events, right? Where you continuously check the subseasonal forecast, and it will give some information it can give information of using the, okay. So it's like, you're not looking for, it's not giving you a perfect forecast, it's giving you information that can be used more than just a guessing game or just using climatology on testing whether these will occur as the weeks approaches closer, nearer, closer.
Thank you very much for that. I just have another question regarding, let me say, a different kind of event, of extreme events. Could you think that your methodology and also of analysis, of identifying mechanism, could be also applied for drought events? I mean, and especially something which is related to the extreme precipitation events, such as the so-called flash drought. I mean, the extreme drying of soils, so something which could be identified as an extreme dry period with a heat wave. So something like a multi-week event. So the question is, could your method or your feeling is regarding the identification of flash drought could be useful also for such kind of extreme event on the other side of the distribution?
Once again, extreme precipitation. Precipitation itself is a difficult thing to forecast. Drought, on the other hand, depends on other factors looking, and it's over longer scale where the soil begins to dry over time, not just one time. So here I would say, for me personally, using both the seasonal along with the sub-seasonal forecast together to monitor these droughts. So you first start with the seasonal forecast, monitoring if there will be a drought, and again looking at the sub-seasonal forecast for the week which may be driest. And here, say for the agriculture people, can look at, okay, during the week we need to ramp up the irrigation process if the probability is high here. Again, the sub-seasonal forecast is in its infancy stage. There's a lot of potential for using it. There's a lot of ways for using this for different persons who require information on a longer time scale than the weather forecast. And drought, in terms of my methodology, you can say that you use the mean sea level pressure and looking at the SPIs for using the precipitation. But it's kind of tricky because instead of centering it on one day, you kind of have to look at it over the precipitation over the entire week, along with the mean sea level and the geopotentiality and everything. Along, I would add here, soil moisture information as well, and use soil moisture that could help give added information here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wasita, for your presentation. I have a general curiosity because I'm really not in the field of meteorology, but more in disaster risk reduction. And so I was wondering if you think that involving stakeholders such as the civil protection might help you to better define the scope of this research, because of course the usability of the forecast is a compromise between the lead time and accuracy. So sometimes the decisions are taken where you have, let's say, a sort of, you have to exceed a certain level of certainty before taking decisions, especially in the civil protection systems. And since we are often overwhelmed by a lot of warnings, different colors of warnings, this kind of sub-seasonal forecast could change really the operational activities of the civil protection. So I was thinking if you have involved some stakeholders during the research, or if you think you are going to involve them in future.
For my research, personally, I did not involve any stakeholders here in Italy. However, I have background in communicating with stakeholders where I was doing seasonal forecasting, so I gained a lot of knowledge there that I brought here and used here. But it will be very interesting to stakeholders out there to work along and have a discussion and even produce products using these forecasts and implementing them. Again, and because there's information, valid information that can be gained from using these subseasonal forecasts, but based upon the particular season as we see, and upon how much lead times, because it's not 1 month lead time, say 3 weeks, which is a little bit better than 2.
Thank you.
Thank you, Azita, for your presentation. And I have a comment on the use of greedy data products for your methodology, especially rainfall data products,
Yes.
greedy data products, which are known not to be particularly representative for rainfall over complex topography, like in Italy. And this is even more a critical issue for predicting extreme events. And probably I would like to have a comment from your side if these could have been introduced as a bias in your results.
The EOBS precipitation data set was selected for the observation data set because it was the only data set that know of that has a longer time period for 30 years over Italy. There are other data sets, but it didn't have this long time period which was needed to develop the climatologies. Yes, there are slight biases because they're graded, where you have one grade box will be hundreds of, many kilometers, difference, but it is a start. We have to start some way. It would be great to have the perfect data in the world to use, but this is what I decided to use and what we'll give to gain. And surely, in the future, while information and data and forecasts become even better because obviously things are improving, there will be more concrete results and information using these better precipitation data set that has a longer time period to give more concrete results.
Did you try to compare EOBS with the station data?
No, because it will be great once again, but again, when it comes to data, it's a headache trying to get station data, and especially for the entire of Italy. Region, yeah, but the whole entire Italy over 30 years, it's a lot of work. But I did compare the EOBS data set with the ERA 5, the reanalysis data set. Just for more for the ERA 5 reanalysis data set, which shows that it does good. But based upon past research, the EOBS data set is very useful because, again, with station data, you introduce in problems with, for radar, for instance, when the rain is blowing, for the rain gauge, not all the rainfall falls in the bucket. You have problem with the wind. And there's not continuous, consistent data across the spatial scale so EOBS was the better, was chosen as the better option to use here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you again, Wazita. Very well, so this is it for them, right? Only half an hour more and everything will be over. So the evaluating committee now will meet for a while until they deliberate. For those of you that wish to know the final outcome, so if the candidates have been approved or not, you can stay around. It shouldn't take too long for the committee to come back here and let us know, okay? And for those of you that want to hear more about earthquake engineering, all of you, I'm pretty sure, we will be here again in the afternoon from 2:30 p.m. Okay? Thank you.